The following episode of Big Little Small Talk may contain content that might be distressing for some listeners.
Welcome, everybody, to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara Sullivan, and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome, listeners. You're on Big Little Small Talk. You're with me, Megan O'Hara Sullivan. Today, we're talking to Mel Lancaster. Mel's got a few titles. She's a volunteer extraordinaire. She's the mother of three. Welcome to Big Little Small Talk, Mel.
Hello, Megan, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Mel, tell me where you grew up. You're not originally a Toowoomba person, are you?
No, I'm not a Queenslander at all. No, I grew up in Armidale in New South Wales, so I'm a New England girl. Born and bred, yes. Left there when I was
What
about
were Mum and
25.
Dad doing in Armidale?
My mum was an RN there. My dad was, well, he started off as a super spreader. So New England has improved pastures and he used to spread super to improve pastures. And then he went back to school, did some further training, and he ended up being a research officer at the University of New England.
So he wasn't a super spreader as in the COVID type of super spreader?
No, he wasn't, no. Just superphosphate spreader.
Right. So you grew up on the land, a country
Yes,
girl?
yes.
Yeah. And were your parents farming as well?
We had some cattle, we had some sheep. All of my relatives were farmers. Mum and Dad, when they got married, they were gifted some land as a wedding present. So
Right.
I grew up in the land. So I spent all of my weekends with my horse and my dog. I preferred them to people. And yeah, pony camp and show jumping. And I was a horsey girl.
Yeah. You were a horsey girl. I love horsey girls.
Mm.
And that life in Armidale, was it kind of as idyllic as it seems from the outside? You know, as you say, the horsey world?
I thought it was. I loved my life in Armidale. New England is a very atypical country town. So it had, I think at the time, 7 schools and had a university and had a teachers' college and had a training hospital. And yeah, it was atypical. Yeah. So we had the Armidale School, there was St Ursula's, there was De La Salle, there was the Armidale High School, then you had numerous primary schools. And yeah, so it was a very different school.
And where did Mel fit into their family? How many brothers and sisters?
I have one brother, I'm the oldest.
Right. And you're very close to your brother?
Not so much now. He's still back in Armidale, but
Yeah.
yeah, not so much now.
And a lot of girlfriends from school?
Yes, I have a few close friends that I'm still in contact with now, but gosh, I haven't been there since I was 25, and I'm not 25 now, so a long time.
Yeah. What did you do? Did you follow in your mother's footsteps and become a nurse?
No, I got a scholarship and went to Teachers College and at the ACAE that it was called then, and then it amalgamated with the university. So it took me several goes to finish. And several years, long years to finish. I had a dream. I wanted to be a governess. I thought that was where I was going to fit into the world. I still haven't worked out what I want to do, actually, but
Join the
yeah.
club. So where did you go when you first finished teaching?
So it took me a long time to finish. So I stopped and started and changed whatever boyfriend I was going with at the time. So I actually did a year of French at uni. So when the university and ACAE amalgamated, I thought, no, I don't want to be a teacher. So I did a year of French because I loved French. Can't speak it now, and I'll tell you a funny story about that when Gary and I travelled. But then I did a year of ag economics, and I bumped and bounced around for years, got married, left Armidale, then finally went back to finish. But I've never worked as a teacher.
Was the life at uni sort of the typical life? I guess I'm guessing it was in the 80s. You and I are probably roughly the same sort of age. Lots of bands, lots of socialising,
was
lots of BNSs,
fabulous.
and yeah.
Lots of BNSs. Yeah, so it was fabulous. I was a member of the Young Nationals, heaven to Betsy. Lots of picnic races. I had a great life. And New England's a very collar up. I always call them collar up. So yes, if you didn't have a red and white striped shirt, moleskins, RMs, and your collar up, you just weren't a New England person.
Yeah, right. What about the polo?
Wasn't a lot of polo
posts,
no, not so much in Armidale. No, a lot of camp drafting.
Right. And you were into that world as well?
Yes, I hung around with that crowd, but all of my cousins were that. So I had my closest family members were the Hiscoxes, my mum's sisters, children. She had 7 of them, and we all went to pony camp. So we all spent our time on horses.
And when did you sort of give the horses away, or are you still a rider?
No, oh gosh, no. When did I give it away? I was only thinking about that today. It probably phases out when you're in sort of year 12, leave school. It's not quite as cool to be hanging around the horses so much. But yeah, still very dear to me. And I tried to get my children into it, but
They wouldn't come across.
not
Yeah, I
quite so
think I
much.
was a bit the same way.
Mm.
So, what was the beverage of choice back in those days? Was it
Oh,
the bourbon and coke?
rum and Coke, yes. Bundy rum and Coke. Mm. Or a bit of rocket fuel if you're at uni.
What's rocket fuel?
Oh gosh, you don't ever ask that. Had a little mixture of everything, got topped up after every rugby game, so you never knew.
Oh gosh. You said, Mel, that you went and you got married in amongst all that going to
Mhm.
uni and going back. And so who was the guy that you married?
So I married, well, he was a school teacher. He was actually a boarder. So I went to St Ursula's, which then became O'Connor. So it went co-ed with De La Salle. And so I married a boy who was 5 years older than me, but he was a boarder at De La Salle. So he went to school with my cousin. So
He wasn't still at school when you
he
got
wasn't
married,
still
I
at school
take
when he
it.
got
Yeah.
married. But we all knew him. He was from Scone and he was an ag teacher at the Armidale School.
What age were you when you got married?
24.
24.
Mm.
And marrying this guy who was 5 years older, how were your parents about that? Was that a bit of a scandal or it was okay?
No, wasn't a scandal. No, I don't know. No thoughts really.
Wasn't a big
No,
deal?
wasn't a big deal.
Was it a big 80s, big meringue
Oh,
wedding
absolutely.
dress and
Taffeta.
big hair?
Yes, absolutely. Taffeta. Yes. At the reception at the golf club. Yes, it was lovely.
Yeah,
Mm.
fairly traditional sort
Fairly
of.
traditional.
Yeah,
Was it? We got married at the school at De La Salle Chapel. So
yeah. And so children, fairly successive.
had 3 children. So we moved. So he was a ag teacher at the Armidale School and a boarding master. So we lived at the Armidale School. Then we moved to Scots College in Warwick, and I thought my life had just ended. Not New England at all. Very different school. Yeah, so we moved there. I'm just trying to think of the dates. 88 might have been 88.
A very different
88,
vibe in
89.
the
Very
yeah,
different
yeah,
town. Yes.
school sort of vibe as well.
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yes. So I wasn't entirely happy, I think. Yes, wasn't very happy. So had 3 children there, Tom, Henry, and Charlotte.
What was the age difference between?
Tom was born in 90, Henry 92, and Charlotte 95.
Whoa, so you're
Mm.
fairly busy. Were
Pretty
you
busy.
working at all at the stage?
No.
Yeah.
I was working a little bit at Glenny Heights State School in the little library up there just prior to having Tom. And but then I didn't work. I was a stay-at-home mum then.
And how did you find that? Was that something that you were comfortable with?
Yes, I had friends that were all new to Warwick that all had children the same age. So we all spent our time together.
Mm.
Yes.
Are
But
you
I think I wasn't settled there. So
Yeah. So what happened after that? You
so
stayed there for how long?
so Charlotte turned 1 and then I had to go. So I packed my children up and went back to Armidale,
Did you?
which not for very long. That didn't work out very well as far as their father went. So I had to get back up to Queensland. In the meantime, I had met Gary, the love of my life, absolute love of my life. And he was building, he was a builder in Warwick and a big family in Warwick. And he was building out of town, I think, at the time. But we crossed paths a few times in my stay in Warwick. But then, so he found me a house to rent here in Toowoomba. And then he and his brother opened an antique centre here in Toowoomba. So he got out of building. And so my 3 small children and I arrived in Toowoomba with the local builder.
Right. So it had already been sort of consolidated, this relationship with Gary by then. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And had Gary been married or had any children?
Yes, he was married and he had 3 children. He had just left his wife. So
Right.
that was a good opportunity for me to go.
Yeah, right. So Toowoomba, how did you find that in terms of settling in, and what age? They were really small. Your children were
Charlotte
in
was
primary
only
school.
1. I found it really hard, but I only had eyes for Gary, really, at that time. I didn't even know that there was another world out there. So, yes, that's
And how did the children go with Gary? Were they?
pretty good. Charlotte only really knew Gary. Yes, so she developed quite a close bond with Gary. Henry and Gary got on pretty well. Tom was a bit older, so he thought he was the head of the household. So that was a little bit of a struggle for a while, but he and Gary became great mates at the end.
Yeah, right. And so the kids all go off to primary school and all their set of friends. You're making friends. You and Gary are deliriously happy.
Mhm.
So then the kids are all sort of in high school and they've all got lots of friends and going to parties and things. So, Mel, tell me what happened on the Labor Day long weekend on the 2nd of May 2009.
We had a fairly normal life. School life was fairly normal. Spent my time driving children to sport, cricket, swimming, rugby, ballet, whatever it was at the time. Tom had finished school, so he was having a bit of a gap year. Turned out to be a 2-year gap year, but anyway, that was okay. Henry was in year 12. Charlotte was in year 9 at Glennie. So the boys went to Downlands. Charlotte was at Glennie. On the 2nd of May 2009, Henry had played rugby against Brisbane Boys Grammar. He was in the first 15. We had not long built a new home out at Highfield, so it was still like a building site. So the house was finished, but landscaping wasn't. So we were never into parties. But Henry always wanted to have some friends around. So after that game, he said, can I just have a couple of mates over? So it was only going to be a couple of mates. And one of them was a boarder. So he hadn't been home for a few weeks. Hamish. Dom Hodell was driving the car. So he was the only boy with the licence. He was a little bit older than the others. And anyway, there was only about, I'm trying to think, it was five boys came out. So it really was just a small thing. They brought their pyjamas and their swags and they were staying the night. So that's the way it was. Tom was playing rugby at Gundawindi at the time. So he was playing rugby for USQ. And it was just a really ordinary evening. We had a barbecue. And then another car arrived and some of the girls arrived. And about 10 o'clock, they decided they needed to go. It was must have been boring at our place, but some of the boys needed to get back into town. And 2 cars left our property that night with 10 kids.
So then you and Gary are just at home on your own?
So Gary had gone to bed. I think the Wallabies had lost rugby on TV, so he had a huff and went to bed. I cleaned up after the barbecue, so because we have a courtyard that's downstairs and the kitchen's right up the other end, so I just packed all of that up. I can remember hearing sirens at the top of the hill, thinking, wow, that's a lot of sirens, not thinking for a moment that it was anything to do with us. And then we got a phone call from a friend of ours who was in the police force that wanted to talk to Gary, and he was quite insistent. And normally he's quite jovial on the phone, but he was quite stern and serious.
So you'd answered the phone and he
So I
said,
answered
can I
the
speak to
phone,
Gary?
because he phoned on Gary's mobile, but I told him that Gary had gone to bed and that I wasn't going to wake him up. And he said, oh, no, you need to have him with you. And he went on. And I kept insisting that I wasn't going to wake him up. And then he said that I had to promise that I'd get him when he told me the news. So he said that Henny had been in a car crash and that he needed me to be with him. So in my mind, it was a broken arm or a broken leg. So I went into Gary and told him that Henry was taken to the hospital. And Gary sort of got up in a panic, but I told him, oh, no, it'll be right. It'll be fine. Charlotte and I will drive in. So when we talked to Martin, we asked him what hospital they were taking Henry to, and he muffled the phone and was talking, and then he came back and said, oh, it's Oakey. I can remember this like as if it was yesterday. So Charlotte and I hopped in the car and we drove the back road. So you come to the top of our hill and you can turn left and go into town, or you can go straight ahead and you can go the back way to Oakey. So I must have had an angel on my shoulder that night because we went the back way to Oakey. And Oakey is basically a nursing home. So we're rattling on the doors and banging on the doors. Someone on a 2-way just said no, they weren't here. So we phoned Martin back, and in the confusion he said, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, it was an Oakey ambulance. So we had to get from Oakey back into Toowoomba Base.
Now, how were you feeling at this stage? Were you worried?
Absolutely
really?
panicked at this stage.
Right.
I think because so much time had passed, it was absolute panic. So I just had Charlotte sitting beside me. Tom was in Gundy still, on the way back from Gundy. Gary was at home sort of panicking. He was on the phone all the time. What's going on? What's going on? We finally got to the base hospital, got into the accident emergency, and you wait in that big long line to get up to the counter. And by this stage, I was absolutely beside myself. And I said, oh, my son's just been brought in by ambulance. He was in an accident. And they said, okay, describe him to us. And I said, oh, he has blonde hair. She said, there's 4 out there with blonde hair. I said, he has blue eyes. Oh, well, there's 3 out there with blue eyes. I said, oh,
You couldn't say his name.
I think I must have said his name, but I didn't mean
Yeah.
anything at that stage. And then I said, oh, he had a little chipped tooth from rugby. And she goes, oh, I'll take you straight through to him. So when they do triage, that's how minutely they go over their bodies.
So tell me then, what was the next sequence of events after that? When did you kind of realise? Did you see Henry then when you
Yes.
went?
Yes.
And what sort of state?
I think your mind really shuts down when you go into that preservation mode. When they brought me into Henry, there was just people around him everywhere. Henry was intubated, he had monitors all around him, there was lots of beeping, but the whole area was chaos. All the beds were full, there were just people everywhere. It was absolutely amazing. They all stepped back to let me be with Henry. Henry didn't have any marks on him whatsoever. So there were no open wounds and no marks on him whatsoever. So he just looked like Henry lying there. And then we got taken away and we had lots of meetings. By this stage, Gary had arrived. So he was with me at that stage as well. And the other parents were all slowly arriving. So we're all sort of meeting each other outside curtains, waiting for news of our children. So then we went in and had a meeting. 3 of the boys were airlifted. So they were preparing Henry to be airlifted to Royal Brisbane. Nick went to the Gold Coast Hospital and Tim went to the PA. So they all went to different hospitals. I found Lek. Lek was walking around the back there, so he was fine. I found Dom. He was sitting up in one of the beds and he had a bandage on his head and a bandage on his arm. I think I'm trying to remember, but Lek was walking around. He was fine. And I can remember not being able to find William. And it was Lek that told me that he had passed away. So 2 of the boys had already died. So William died at the scene. He took the impact to the car. And Hamish died on the operating theatre. They couldn't get a cardiac thoracic surgeon to him in time.
Now, at what stage did you realise how deadly serious it was? When you saw Henry?
As soon as I saw him and it wasn't a broken arm or a broken leg or a bump on the head, I knew it was pretty serious. But your mind really protects you from that.
How did you feel about the idea that he was going to be airlifted away? Or did you just
Well, it was all
do
for the
whatever's the
best.
best?
It was all
Yeah,
for the
yeah.
best, yeah. So watched him, they took me up and we watched him get loaded into the helicopter and he flew off and then we drove down, raced home. I don't know what I packed in a bag, but I packed a bag mainly for him. And we raced down to the Royal Brisbane Hospital to be with him.
Mm. And tell me about the next sort of week. What happened? You sat by his side, Henry.
He was on
life
4
support?
days. He was on life support. He didn't regain consciousness. Lots of meetings. The PA ICU is a very strange, but not PA, Royal Brisbane Hospital PA, just being the PA. Royal Brisbane Hospital is a very strange, any ICU is a very strange place. It's very quiet and sombre and lots of beeping and monitors and and you just hope that what they're doing is the right thing. And you have this belief, that you'll be taking him home. So I always believed that would be taking him home.
And then, so you sat there and the family was all gathered around, I guess, or the other children and Gary.
Yes, and my mum and dad came down. Someone brought mum and dad down and Henry's father came up and there were just lots of people, lots of his friends came to visit. And it's almost as if he held on for 4 days until he got to see everyone. Up until that point, there was a little bit of hope. It might have only been 1 or 2% chance of survival, but you hear the word survival, so you don't think of the percentage. You just focus on the survival. And I really thought that I'd be able to take him home. But on the 4th day, he was pronounced brain dead and that there wasn't anything else that they could do for him. So we then decided that Henry would be an organ donor. So Henry was on his L's, and all teenagers have those discussions at school about driving safely, etc., and becoming organ donors and all that sort of stuff. So we decided that Henry would be an organ donor. So on the 5th day, I stayed with him all night. So once we made that decision and they did all the testing and made sure that he could do that, I stayed with him all night. And he left me at, I think it was 5 o'clock in the morning to go off to his final theatre. And it was all very respectful. Yeah.
Mel, when you're there and the doctors say, what do you want to do? Is that how it goes? Like, do you have to Are they asking
They
you or are
didn't.
they telling you?
No, they didn't suggest it at all. We had the final meeting where they said that he was brain dead and that there was no hope. So, yes, I still remember that room. Gary holding my hand, Charlotte's head in my lap. Goodness me.
Wow.
Anyway,
I think it's
so it was while we were in that room, we decided that something good had to come of that. So they didn't have to ask us. I don't know what the normal procedure is, but they didn't have to ask us. We had decided that that would be some good had to come of it.
goodness. So tell me about Henry as a child. What sort of child was he?
Wow, Henry.
Was he
Henry was
wild or-
my he was a
Was he-
little child, second son. He was my 9 pound 5 breech baby. So and I was in labour with him, and John Esler was actually my doctor up here. So I was coming up for visits up here. I didn't have my babies in Warwick. I had them here in Toowoomba at St Denny's. So yes, I can remember seeing him that day and telling him that I had these pains, and he said, "Oh, it's just Braxton Hicks. You'll be fine. I don't think he's due. We'll book him in a week early so that we'll have a Caesar." And drove back to Warwick, and Henry was coming do or die, so we had to get back for an emergency Caesar of my 9 pound 5 baby boy. So yes, he was always going to cause me some trouble, wasn't he? He was quite academic. He was a very charismatic character. He was popular. He was academic. He was sporty. Yeah, he was a whole little package. Yeah.
I know you spoke about Lech Blaine before, and I think one time when Lech had written his book called Lech Blaine's Car Crash, a memoir, and I saw him launch the book, and you did the opening speech at St Mary's, which I know that saying to people, I don't know how you did it, but Mel, I don't know how you did it. And tell me about asking Lech to do Henry's eulogy. What did you want to do there?
I think I would have done it totally differently if hindsight's an amazing thing. I was in mother mode. I think I was trying to make everyone feel comfortable about this horrible tragedy. Henry and Lech had a very special bond, and not that they were friends for a long time. Lech was a St Mary's boy, but they really kicked it off. So I just found Lech fascinating, and Henry used to talk about Lech all the time, how fascinating he was. Everyone else had car books, car magazines beside the bed. Lech had, political books on his bedside table. He was a very different sort of character. So, and Henry really admired that in him. I just asked if Lech would like to do the eulogy. And at the time he said yes, but I think he was still in shock about it all. And I think he mentions it in the book that he would have liked to have declined, but he didn't know how. And in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have asked him. But I was too busy
thinking
making...
rationally,
No,
are you?
no, not at
No,
all. Not at
no.
all.
But I did read an article where he said, I said all the things that I thought his mates would want to hear, but what I really wanted to say was that he was the type of person who could say out loud, I love you to your mum.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Lech and I have talked about that a lot since. And I think I was trying to please all of his friends at his funeral. So, yeah. Anyway.
Can I ask you, was Henry how did he get on with his siblings? Like, was he a fussy eater, or did he
was
sort of,
annoying.
temper tantrum?
He was
kid, or-
annoying. No, he wasn't temper tantrum. No. He was probably closer to Charlotte. Tom was a bit older and cooler, but he was probably closer. Henry was a bit daggy. He was closer to Charlotte. He was into music, so he was my music advisor. He would tell me what I should be listening to. Mum, you would really like this.
Blink-182.
Yeah, all sorts of weird, wonderful things. And actually, on the day that I drove him into rugby, because he was in Year 12 and he was in the first 15, those boys have to go in earlier for rugby and they help the younger teams. And on the way in, he said to me, "Oh, Mum," he always bags the front seat so he could work the radio. He said, "Oh, Mum, you need to listen to this. This is the script." And they played the song Break Even. And that was the last song Henry ever told me to listen to. And so it's become a bit of a theme in our family now. But yeah, so Henry was my music advisor, but he was annoying. I think Tom and Henry used to get Charlotte to play rugby and she'd always huff and puff, and that's not fair. You're boys, you're bigger. So they said, oh, okay, well, to make it fairer, we'll play Nugby. It's on your knees, and we'll put all pillows for the beds all around. So she was always throttled and in tears, and there was always lots of shushing, shh, don't tell mum. But yeah, they played Nugby. Henry was always the instigator. Mm.
I find with my memories of my young family that as you sort of, it was so chaotic and so much fighting and so much, as you say, punching each other up, that I've sort of put it in a box and I can hardly remember it. Is that
It is a bit
scary
like
for
that.
you though? Do you think, I
Um,
can't remember?
Do you know, particularly about Henry, that worries me that I forget things to a point where 15 years down the track, I think, did I really have a Henry? Did he really exist? Because I still have my other children. I still talk to them and hear about what's happening in their lives, but that all stopped for Henry. And so you often think, this is my weird thinking, gosh, is that all a figment of my imagination? So that gets hard.
And what about the way that people reacted to you? Did you find on the most part that it was good, or did a lot of stuff really irritate you?
Honestly, Megan, for the first 12 months, I wanted to draw the curtains and live in a darkened room. And I stopped being a mother, a wife, a daughter, a friend. I wasn't very good at anything, really. I felt like a real failure. Because as a mother, you can solve a lot of problems, but that was really big and couldn't solve that one. And if it wasn't for Gary, who did the washing and cleaning and cooking and got Charlotte back to school and did everything, yeah, I don't know how we all survived. We were like ships in the night. But I just really couldn't cope. Raising a child is not what anyone plans to do.
No,
But
absolutely not.
yeah, you do feel, I felt like a failure.
Did you remember at any stage where there was a little bit of blue sky?
It slowly comes and you can't remember the point. You go to lots of I went to lots of counsellors, and some of them aren't very good, believe me, you're throwing good money after bad. But I only ever found two brilliant ones. One of them was a social worker at the hospital, and she was amazing. And I found that I could hold myself together enough. Gary used to drive me into the first couple of meetings, and then I got brave enough to drive in. And I used to go in and I'd sit in the weight room, and she'd come out and we'd greet and talk and exchange pleasantries. And as soon as she shut the door, I just burst into tears. So for an hour I cried, and she didn't judge me or say anything or tell me not to. She just passed the tissues. And that happened for a couple of appointments. And then eventually the crying wasn't quite so much. So then she could talk more. And she said to me, crying's fine and feeling dark is fine. But eventually you'll stop crying for that whole 24 hours and you'll notice a bird singing or the sun on your back or a flower blooming, and then you can go right back to crying. And over a period of time, that changes. It's like a pendulum, and that'll change. So you'll notice the sun on your back or your garden or the sky more than you want to cry. And it did, but you can't pinpoint when that happens.
Isn't it interesting that all those things that you said are all visceral things? They're all, when you said that, the sun on your skin or the beauty of something, like it's all about the senses, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I would have thought that it'd be the feeling of the weight of it. It might lift a little
I
bit.
think the weight does lift when you notice those things. Whatever you can't notice them, it's heavy and dark. But when you can notice something, the sun rising or a flower that's come out, or you don't think about it for that brief moment.
If you've just tuned in, we're talking to Mel Lancaster. Mel has just told us the saddest story probably that you could ever have of losing a child and what that's like and getting through that. Mel, you said that Gary has always been the love of your life. What's your favourite thing about Gary?
Oh, my favourite thing about Gary, his sense of humour, his strength, there's too many favourite things. I have too many favourite things. He was honestly the love of my life.
Yeah. And you just really clicked it off. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So the kids grew up and they all left home, and you got on with your lives of doing a lot of charity work, Protea Place, Zonta. What was Gary doing for work?
Gary's a builder by trade. He worked with nearly all building companies at the time, he was at the time, our last few years, he was with NRG as a safety manager. So he was a safety environmental manager.
And you're very social, you two? You're off at the beef and the burgundy
Yes.
or whatever it is, isn't it?
Oh, we went to Gather and Graze. I think Gary'd like to sit at home and not do anything in his undies and watch TV. I don't know, whatever blokes
mean,
do.
yeah,
but,
that's
stubby. I don't know.
Watching the rugby. What about
yeah.
travelling? Did you travel
Love
very
travel,
much?
love
You
travel.
both love the same sorts
Mm.
of things?
We really did. So, yeah, we both
Overseas or
both
in-
oldest children. So
Yeah.
he was firstborn, I was firstborn.
Yeah.
Yeah, very similar personalities, I think.
Right. Which is
Um,
what? How would you describe your person?
Well, I'm a Cancerian, so I'm a bit of a closed book, I suppose. But I don't know, we just loved the same things. We laughed at the same things. We just enjoyed doing the same.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed his company.
Yeah.
Of anyone, I enjoyed his company the
Company.
most. Mm.
And I read Amanda Dalton, who we have also interviewed here on Big Little Small Talk, who is the founder and CEO of Protea Place. What were you doing there?
I'm just do their admin at Protea Place. I had actually retired after 23 years with the federal government. Was looking forward to retirement. My granddaughter, my son and his wife had just moved back to Toowoomba, so I thought, this is it, I've had enough. Amanda rang one day and said, oh, look, we really need someone to do some admin, just until we can advertise in the new year. So I thought, oh, okay, I can do that for 2 months. That was 2 years ago. So she hasn't advertised yet.
Still there. But I did read that Mel came with a package and she brought Gary, who could fix things
That's
and do
right.
things. So that's a bit handy.
Handy, yes, he was our handyman. Mm.
And you liked going on road trips. Tell me about the
did.
green panel van.
Oh, the green panel van. Well, that was actually Henry's car. So Henry was white when he bought it. So yes, in year 12 at Downlands, everyone was buying their cars, their first cars. Henry wanted a panel van. Of course, there was a lot of eye rolling. And Gary found some farmer that was selling one near Clifton, and down we went for $2,000, bought this panel van. So Henry used to spend his time with a toothbrush polishing the jelly bean rims on the car. I think he drove it once with Gary, but he didn't ever really get to drive it. But that was his first car. He wanted to drive through the gates of Downlands on his last day of school in a panel van. That was Henry.
You're right, right. And I can't imagine the shag and wagon type jokes. And Gary loves cooking pizza. What does he say every time he brought you out a new taste, a new?
You think, I think I've cracked it this time, love. Yeah, that was his general term.
Were
Yes, I've
they-
cracked it this time, love.
Were they unusual types of pizzas, like
No, he was actually
mushroom
re-
and
no, he
tiramisu
was
or something?
No, he was really good. He was a very good pizza cook. Yes, he took his pizza eating very seriously. In Italy, that's all he would eat. I thought he'd come home looking like a pizza, but anyway, yes. But he was always perfecting the pizza. Mm.
Yeah. What are some of your favourite travel memories? Obviously going to Italy. What else?
Travel with Gary was fabulous. Gary used to spend all of his time researching, and he'd do up a little book and have it, all in a binder and have everything booked prior to going, which used to drive me nuts because I like to just stand on a platform and look left and look right and go somewhere. But Gary'd have to have everything planned. And if I threw his plans out by wanting to stay somewhere an extra day, it was like
Wasn't
panic
good
to
with
make
the
up.
right. He's happy to go, but he liked it all being
Yes, he
sorted out.
liked
Yeah.
it. Yes, he didn't like any surprises.
Yeah.
Mm.
So Gary had a heart valve replaced
He
2
did.
years ago.
He did.
And that all went well, or what happened?
So when he joined NRG, he was one of the managers, the senior management team. When anyone joins the company, they send them off for a medical. So Gary said, oh, I better go for a medical. And I think someone said to him, oh, you don't have to go, mate. You're one of the managers. And Gary said, oh, no, I'll go. Then I know what the younger fellas are going through. So it was through the medical that they picked up he had a heart murmur. So in all this time, it's never been picked up. So from there, more tests were done. And it was still discovered that he had a bicuspid valve and an extended aorta. So he needed a bicuspid valve repair and a bovine valve replacement.
You had the operation, were you sort of a bit, post-traumatic stress, worried that something would happen?
Going near
or-
any hospital is like that. Yes, it was quite stressful. And again, your mind goes into that self-preservation, so you think everything will be all right. It was a different hospital, wasn't the Royal Brisbane, it was the PA, so everything's going to be all right. But he came through the surgery really well, And he was doing all the right things. He was getting fit again. He was walking, and yeah, he was doing really well.
And when did you start to think, or when did he start to think that something might not be right?
So the weekend prior to Anzac Day, he
So that's this year, 2 years later.
2 years later, this year. Actually, it was on the Sunday we drove down and bought tiles because I was due to have my hip replaced. And we went down to Brisbane and bought tiles because he was going to work from home, but he was going to tile my front steps. A job, I live with a builder, so I have little jobs. And he was going to do that. So we brought the tiles home. The next day he came home from work and he said that he thought he was getting a cold. He was feeling a bit hot and cold, a bit fluey. And we didn't sort of think of it. He had dinner. We had dinner as normal and he went to bed. On Tuesday, he woke up and didn't go to work because he was feeling a bit fluey.
And that was unusual for Gary.
So I got him into the GP. She said, oh, yes, I think you're getting the flu. Told me to keep away because I was due to get my hip replaced in a week or two. And yeah, sent him home and told him to stay on Panadol, Nurofen and bed rest. But he went and had a swab for COVID and SARS and all the usual things. That night he came home, he went to bed. On the Wednesday, I left a little bit earlier because I had to pick Stella up and take her to kindy, and then I went to
Granddaughter?
Protea Place. Yeah. And I went into Protea Place until 2 o'clock. Left there at 2, so tried to phone Gary all day and he didn't answer the phone. And Tim, one of the other managers from work, phoned me and said, oh, how's Gary going? And I said, oh, didn't he go to work? He said, no, I haven't heard from him. So it was all a bit unusual. As I was driving up the hill to head home, I finished work at 2. I was driving up the hill and I phoned Sophie to see if she wanted me to pick up Stella. And Sophie didn't answer the phone. So if Sophie had answered and said yes, I would have turned around and gone back into town. So again, I think I had an angel on my shoulder. So when I arrived home, I walked in the door and Gary was sitting on the lounge. The front door was open, the back door was open, the TV was on, the dog was outside, so he'd been up during the day. But I don't think he knew who I was. He was delirious. And I checked his temperature. It was really, really high, really high. He couldn't stand. I couldn't get him to stand up. He wasn't communicating, so I phoned Triple O and got the ambulance. They seemed to take forever, but I think it was only about 10 or 15 minutes. While they were coming up the front steps, he had a seizure and rolled off from the lounge onto the floor. And yeah, they then called for backup. The backup, interestingly enough, was, do you know Mick Metcalf? He's one of the paramedics in town. Amazing man. He was the man that helped Henry and stayed with Henry 15 years earlier. And Mick and I have sort of become friends and bonded over that. When the call for backup came through from the 2 ambulance officers that were in our house, he saw the address and said, oh, I know that address. So he took the job and came out. When I saw him walk up the steps, I thought, oh, everything's going to be okay. Mick's very calm, just really calm, and, pushed all the furniture back, and they loaded Gary up, did some tests, loaded Gary up and took him into the hospital. Gary didn't really regain consciousness then. He was then airlifted to the PA. He had a septic mass. So he had sepsis, had a big septic mass in his brain. So they airlifted him to the PA. The next day he had neurosurgery, which they didn't think he would survive from. And then in ICU, he opened his eyes and was communicating, which they were all surprised at. Then they moved him down onto the ward, and he was on really strong antibiotics because he still had sepsis pumping around his system. And the conversation we had was that he would be at the PA for a long, long time. So to treat sepsis, well, the only way to treat sepsis was on very strong antibiotics, IV antibiotics. And so he would be remaining there. So I packed up, raced home, got a dog sitter, got someone to look after my house, checked on my mum, did all those sorts of things, packed more clothes because I'm a hopeless packer because I thought I was going to be there for a long time. Raced back down on the Thursday. And then on the Friday, they said, oh, we're moving him back to Toowoomba. So I had to try and think it was a good thing that they were moving him back. I have my theories as to why. So they cancelled scans and things changed. So he went by ambulance back to Toowoomba. Toowoomba Base did the scan here and discovered a big septic mass around his aorta and said he has to be back in Brisbane. So on Mother's Day, Gary went back to the PA and then he died on the Tuesday.
So through all of that, were you, he's going to be right? No, he's not going to be right.
his
Oh, look,
did you ever think that that was going to be the outcome? Like when you saw him having the
no.
a seizure, or
Um,
at any point did you ever possibly think this beautiful
He was
young man is going to
very
survive
unfamiliar.
this?
Gary was my support person through some of my darkest moments. And I can honestly say that I don't think I would have survived without Gary.
Mm.
So now my support person was
Mm.
it was gravely ill. That was really hard to face.
Mm. Mm. And I know kind of when you're going through it, people say to you afterwards, I don't know how you did it. You
Oh,
don't have a choice.
no, you don't. You actually don't. And even now they say, "Oh, you're so strong. You know, how do you do all this?" You think, "Well, what's strong? What's strong?"
Mm.
I don't know.
Mm. So I know you said to me in the middle of this, you said, 15 years ago, I sat where my son was on life support,
Yeah.
and now I'm doing it again. Should one person have to do it once in their life, let alone twice? That's a rhetorical question, I suppose.
And the bizarre thing, it was in May. Everything happens in May. Good things too. Charlotte was born in May. I met Gary. I always say I met Gary in May. We got married in May. Henry died in May. Now Gary died in May. So May's a pretty tough month.
Mm. Is there any comparison? Is it even? Can you even ask the question or think about the question between the two lots of grieving, or do you know anything from your first lot of grieving that has helped you? I suppose
They're two very different. It's very, very different. I get cranky with Darren. I've told him that he's taken my thoughts away from Henry.
right.
Yeah, I'm finding this one a bit tough, a
Mm.
different tough.
Is it because there isn't that support person at home like Gary was for
Yes,
you?
exactly.
Or is it because you're still in that dark room?
I'm not in the dark room, no. Gary taught me to be out of the dark room. I think it's just, I miss him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I miss how he used to honour Henry. So he and I could talk about Henry where other people find it a bit difficult. He did really lovely things in honour of Henry. So on the 2nd of May or the 6th of May, 2nd of May, the crash anniversary, or the 6th of May when Henry died, he'd always have time off and we'd do something. We'd go for lunch at Mulaney, or we'd go to Killarney to have a steak sandwich, or we'd go, I don't know, Gary would just do
Mark the
something
occasion.
for the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'd sit in the car and he'd hold my hand and we just, it was just, yeah.
It just sounds like such an incredibly thoughtful person.
He really was. And I think, his dad passed away at an early age, and I think Gary became the head of his house. So he's lived through grief and watched his mum through grief. So yeah, I think he knew what grief was.
And knew how to support someone in that grieving.
Yes, exactly. And he was good. Gary was great, and I really miss him.
Yeah.
I miss that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know my mother said when my father passed away, and they didn't have a great relationship, but she said he was always in my corner.
That's
Who
right.
was always in my corner. So tell me about Gary and the French. You're learning French.
Oh, gosh. So I went to uni and did 2 years of French. So you'd think I'd be able to speak it very well. But in Armidale, unless you're using it.
Yeah, right.
Let's just say that. Gary has never learnt another language. So when we were travelling around France, I didn't want to be uncool or mispronounce any words, whereas Gary would go hell for leather on his Australian Warwick French. So bonjour, au revoir. Like he really went to town with his French. I used to always dig Gary because I reckon if he was with someone that had an accent, Gary would develop that accent. He was one of those very impressionable people.
Yeah.
So when in France,
Great fun.
Oh,
This
it was
is
good.
fun. Yeah.
So yes, when I said, "Oh, Gary, that's not how you say it," he said, "Well, you did 2 years. You speak it." I said, no, that Frenchman was way too good looking. I don't want to make a mistake.
Oh, isn't that amazing? Well, from all of that sadness, I don't know what comes of it, and I don't want to say anything pithy because I don't know that anything comes of it, but sharing your story, I think there'll be many listeners out there who can resonate with what you've told us today. Mel, what would you say you're most kind of looking forward to in your future? You've got one grandchild.
Grandchild at the moment. So yeah, just spending time with my children and my grandchildren. I look forward to that.
What about what scares you most about the future?
Loneliness, being lonely.
Had you ever been lonely before?
No,
Like you went from being a schoolgirl to a adult to being
Yes.
married?
never. I've never been lonely before. This is lonely. This is true loneliness, I think. I have, don't get me wrong, I have lots of friends and lots of amazing friends that are always ringing and always calling in, and we're always doing things, but it's not the same.
No.
Going home to an empty house. Yeah.
Is there any solace? Is there any light on the back of on your back yet, or a flower blossoming, or?
Yes, I think there is. There's a lot of downtime. That's probably why I had to go back to Protea Place, and so that I was doing something. Can't stay in my nightie and binge watch Yellowstone and cry all the time. So I had to be doing something. So yeah, and I'm now finding it a bit easier to get dressed. So everything I do, so prior to losing Gary, everything I did was, I used to always think, I wonder what Henry would think of me now. And now I get dressed and I think, I always put my makeup on and do my hair, and I think, oh, it's like as if I'm getting dressed for Gary again. And a really good girlfriend told me that when you get dressed, it's like having a date. Got to always think it's like going out on a date with your husband again. So yeah, that's what I try and do.
Well, you always look beautiful, and you've always got lots of beautiful jewellery. Was Gary, just tell me about Gary being the antique. So it was with his
Yes, he was an
brother.
antique dealer. Yeah, Gary and Graham.
Yeah. Is that why you've got all that beautiful antique
Well, it
jewellery?
is, yes. I've got lots of bizarre things at home. Yeah, Gary was a very bizarre collector.
He was a gift giver too, was he?
He was a gift giver.
Right.
Yes.
Gosh.
And he was always making something for me. Yes, or he'd come in with his hand closed and I'd have to pick which hand, and he'd have a ring or something. Yeah, he was just one of those guys. He was a very atypical builder. So you have an image of a builder, but Gary, he used to collect Clarice Cliff pottery. So if you know 1920s Clarice Cliff pottery, you know that story. So
beautiful.
So she used to do a lot of miniatures. There was Clarice Cliff and Susie Cooper. And anyway, Clarice Cliff used to do a lot of lots of orange and bizarre paintings on her pottery. So Gary used to collect a lot of that miniature stuff. He loved silky oak furniture. So he used to always look for silky oak furniture because that was typically Australian. I'm a cedar girl, but he thought, no. So we clashed a little bit.
Girl.
I'm a bit of a cedar girl. Yeah. When I
All
look
these
around the house, all
fineries.
the kids reckon it looks like an antique shop, but it's got all these little collections of things everywhere.
An incredibly interesting man.
He was, absolutely.
Yeah, and all the joy that he has brought you, and all the comfort in the dark times and in the good times. I'm going to finish off my interview now, and it almost seems too trivial to even ask you, but was Gary a dancing man?
He was.
Yeah. What about Henry? Was he?
Oh, Henry probably was too. Henry was definitely a music man. Gary, typical builder, would sing all the wrong words to songs, but he always had the moves. He thought he had the moves anyway.
What's the song that couldn't keep him and you off the dance floor?
Well, I have to think B-52s.
Oh.
The B-52s, Love Shack.
Yeah.
Maybe that was fun. That was around when Gary and I first met. So I think every time we heard that song, we'd always have to get up.
Song. Oh, isn't that wonderful? And I'll just finish off quickly because I do ask all the guests who come on Big Little Small Talk who their favourite royal is. Do you have a favourite royal?
My favourite royal has changed. So I'm actually liking Camilla.
Oh, heaven. I've never heard anyone say they love Camilla. Tell me why.
I do actually admire her. Well, I think she's more suited to Charles. I think she's quite restrained and, everything's quite natural with her. And, there's just something about her. If you see her beetling around in the background, she's made her way.
Well, do you know what, Mel? I always say if that's not a true love story, that is a true love story, much like yours and Gary's, I think. Yeah, enduring, and maybe took a little while, a couple of S-bends to get there, but you got there in the end, and it should be celebrated.
Thank you.
Look, I really appreciated your honesty and openness and being able to share where you're up to in life so far. Thank you for being my guest today on Big Little Small
Thank
Talk.
you for asking me.
That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.